Good morning. Welcome to our study this morning. We're continuing, or resuming, I guess we should say, resuming our study of the Enneagram and the happiness attainment motivators of the sinful nature. And we're currently on the second of our three religious happiness motivators in the Enneagram system. The Enneagram designates this as the nine strategy. And so we'll pick it up with our lesson 53 this morning. So please join me in a moment of silent prayer. If necessary, you might need to use 1 John 1:9. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. If you need to do that, you can use this time of silent prayer to do so. Please pray with me. Father, as we study this hour, we ask for insight into the way we handle various situations so that we can see this 9-type strategy that the Enneagram has defined as we work, as we interact with those around us, so that we might see how we use our human nature rather than the spiritual nature you have provided for us. We thank you for this time. In Jesus' name, amen. We have a lot of notes today. You'll notice that you have 120 slides. That's by design. Their print, I chose a 36 type for our presentation as opposed to the usual 28. So there are more slides but no more information than the typical. So we'll see if we can make 120 slides. If not, we'll pick it up and carry it over to next week. The primary happiness attainment motivator, or HAM, in the lives of the Enneagrams 8, 9, and 1 is religion. This religion might be a named religious belief system, such as Baptist, Catholic, Hindu, Buddhist, whatever, an alternative to traditional religions, such as atheism or philosophy, or something they would never identify as religion, such as psychology or science. No matter what it is, these people, the 8, 9, and 1, it is these people, the 8, 9, and 1, who predominantly filter by their beliefs. Center 8, 9, and 1 is referred to in the Enneagram system as the instinctive or the gut center. They know. They just know. The predominant motive in the lives of this group is religion, and anger is the primary emotional sin. The anger is expressed differently in all three cases, but anger it is. An angry 8 blocks out thinking, or thinks in caricatures. A compulsive 1 tends to see black and white only, and 9s are passive-aggressive. This group has a different approach than thinkers. They have an intuitive, gut-feeling way of making their way through life. They know what is right and wrong, what is fair and unfair, and what is okay. And they have a strategy for handling life. The 8's religious attention is accomplished by power and control, to making things happen, to protecting the weak, to fighting injustice. With an intense, authoritative, and sometimes explosive energy, they are usually ready to face any challenge. They know what is right and wrong, what is fair, what is unfair. They are religious justice motivated. The 9's religious attention goes to connecting with others, maintaining harmony, peace, and comfort, and avoiding conflict. They typically avoid direct confrontation, but choose to work to bring conciliation. But if angered, and they are angry a lot, they are passive-aggressive and conspire behind the back of their foe. The 1's religious attention is righteousness perfection, and goes to noticing and correcting errors, to identifying and adhering to standards of perfection in thought, feeling, and behavior, to acting according to what is right or wrong, and to expressing their anger by judging and criticizing oneself and others. So if you have any question about your religious motivation for happiness, and trust me, Christians, if they are a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, have a religious happiness motivation that they learn as Christians, as believers if they are, or at least church attenders, they learn religion. And so you're going to have in your own religious motivation one of these three primary components. Now there are others, but one of these three primary. You're going to be peace, love, harmony kind of motivated. You're going to be injustice, what's fair, protecting others, helping others, that sort of motivation. Or you're going to be righteousness, perfection motivated, that things have to be done the right way. So you're going to find yourself in your spiritual lives, which really are our religious lives, going to find ourselves in one or more of these. And you can switch because we tend to learn religion because we have not learned spiritual living. We learn religion as our way to try to relate to God, and we pick up one of these ways of handling life. People of any type 9 are essentially looking to maintain a sense of peace, harmony, and balance, and to avoid conflict and disruption. 9s tend to see the best in people, to be fundamentally optimistic about the future, and when reasonably healthy, to have a calming and grounding effect on those around them. As a general rule, 9s are fairly easygoing. They adopt a strategy of going with the flow. They intuitively know how to wait for the opening so that they can slip effortlessly into that stream. 9s don't tend to sweat the small stuff. On the whole, they are self-effacing, tolerant, even-tempered, and likable individuals. 9s aspire to be supportive, loving, and gentle, and more than any other enneatype are likely to embody these valuable qualities. Given such a portrait, it might seem difficult to understand what is so problematic about the 9 type fixation. The central problem for 9 revolves around the fact that their desire to maintain peace and to avoid conflict is compulsive. It overrides everything else. Honesty, fairness, whatever. It overrides everything else. Just avoid conflict at all cost. As the potential for conflict in life is virtually ubiquitous, the 9's inability to confront it forcefully and deal with it effectively leaves the 9 at a serious disadvantage when it comes to living a full, satisfying, and honest life. This deeply rooted tendency to avoid discord plays itself out both internally and in the realm of external action, but generally manifests most centrally in close personal relationships, as intimate relations, more than anything else, tend to trigger our core defenses. No matter what our defense strategies are, the closer we are to the person, the more likely we are to enter into a core defense under stress. Many 9s are successful when it comes to their interactions with the world. They are frequently productive and often manage to rise through the ranks on the basis of their likability and reliability without having to engage too forcefully in direct competition. Thus, even in a capitalist economy, many 9s manage to succeed while maintaining an attitude of forbearance and cooperation. 9s are not necessarily without ambition either, something easily attested to by the sheer number of leaders who have had a type 9 fixation. Some such 9s are able to take on leadership roles because they wear their fixations lightly. Perhaps they enjoy the benefits of a fortunate upbringing, or perhaps their work on themselves has borne fruit. Sometimes 9s who take on leadership roles seem to be the living embodiment of a solution that has been offered to us from the depths of the collective unconscious. They represent the only possible answer to the exigencies of a time in which the forward path cannot be determined by aggressive self-assertion or even by clarity of intellect. Abraham Lincoln, perhaps the greatest of America's presidents, could modestly state, "I claim not to have controlled events, but confess plainly that events have controlled me." Healthy 9s are in touch with their depths and are able to maintain their sense of self even in the face of the most powerful or forceful opposition or the most appalling conflict. Even as they rule, they serve those they lead. They're very responsive to the people that they lead and reflect that back. Less healthy nines who take on leadership roles, however, tend to adopt a strategy of muffling from awareness the likely negative consequences of their actions. They muffle things. They put earmuffs on so that they don't hear the negative consequences of their actions. Often they surround themselves with like-minded others who reinforce their sense of security and who serve as a buffer from all forms of dissent, thus enabling the nine to remain insulated. You've seen that in multiple presidents over the past few decades, that they surround themselves. It's like they're insulated from the real world. They don't realize what's going on, what the people are actually thinking, because they have muffled that that outside negative influence that has negative consequences that have come from their actions, and they surround themselves with people who reassure them, reinforce their belief system, and help insulate them from the rabble outside. Most of the unhealthy nines insulating buffers against reality, however, are actually internal to the psyche. A deeply entranced nine simply dissociates from whatever is unpleasant or unpalatable from whatever disturbs his preferred view of the world. Such comfortably numb nines simply fail to process any information which would be a cause of discomfort or disturbance. They just avoid it. It's like they don't hear it. Okay? So we can ask, in the case of leaders and in the case of people that you know who are nines, how can they not see? Why can't they see what they're doing? Why can't they see the consequence? They don't process it. They because that desire for peace, harmony, no disruptions is so overriding, they have used it to block out any negatives. About this phenomenon, Naranjo, one of the original Enneagram teachers, comments thusly: not wanting to see, not wanting to be in touch with one's experience is something akin to cognitive laziness, an eclipse of the experiencer or inner witnessing in the person. Unhealthy nines, even as they take on roles of leadership, which would seem to involve self-assertion, are often actually deeply entrenched in a peculiar form of self-abnegation. Self-abnegation, I'm giving you the definition there in case you didn't know that: the setting aside of self-interest for the sake of others or for a belief or principle. Hence, we encounter the portrait of the nice guy, the one who is affable to even the lowliest employee. He has a ready smile and a genial manner. He means no one any harm. So no matter what harm he has done, he sleeps well. His conscience is clear. He never assumes any responsibility for the evil he has wrought, because he didn't intend to. I didn't intend to do anything wrong. I didn't intend to hurt people. I didn't intend to cause problems. So therefore, it's not my fault. As opposed to the one who would say, oh my gosh, I've hurt that person's feelings. What am I going to do about it? You know, I've really messed up here. I've got to make that right. Okay? The 8, too bad. Too bad for them. They need to straighten up. They need to learn about life. Okay? The 8, 9, and 1 anger religious strategies have different ways of addressing the same issue. It's an almost universal rule that those leaders who rise to power in spite of, or even by virtue of their unconsciousness, have managed to do so because they have unwittingly embodied and reflected back the irresponsibility and lack of consciousness of those who brought them to power. See, the 9 reflects. A 9 in leadership reflects those that they lead. It's that irresponsibility and lack of consciousness in those who have brought them to power that they reflect back. About such rulers, it would be fair to say that even as they rule, they follow those they lead. While the above may seem something of an exaggerated portrait, exaggerations often serve to illustrate key points. Virtually all 9s tend to see what they wish to see, to idealize those they love, and to ignore whatever would disturb their comfort and peace of mind. These tendencies are not left behind until a 9 is truly healthy. The problem with this approach, of course, is that the problems do not cease to exist simply because the 9 ignores them. They have consequences, often deleterious ones, both for the 9 and for those in the 9's life. While some 9s do assume positions of leadership, most 9s are not especially ambitious. They pay their dues to the world, but essentially prefer to withdraw from it. They are homebodies who are generally devoted to their families, especially to their children. They enjoy their hobbies and appreciate some time to themselves. They generally value simplicity and cultivate the virtue of patience. They are frequently creative in a modest and unassuming way, unlike the 4, who is going to be more flamboyant in their creativity. They adopt an attitude of acceptance towards life. They don't ask for too much. Sometimes they ask for too little. At a very deep level, at a level which seldom breaks through to conscious awareness, most 9s simply feel that they don't deserve too much, that they just don't deserve it. Just whatever I have is what I deserve. 9s would do well to develop a certain kind of healthy selfishness, as many of their difficulties turn on the fact that they are too selfless. And not many 9s do turn into a certain unhealthy selfishness, as we'll see later. As mentioned above, the 9's core issues tend to manifest most profoundly in the context of intimate relationships. It is here that the 9's need to avoid conflict bears its most obvious fruit. Many 9s seem to find it excruciatingly difficult to assert themselves against those they love, even when it comes to trivial matters. They would rather defer to their partner than assert their own preferences. Their preference is not very strong, they reason, whereas the partner is willing to put up a fight, therefore it seems only reasonable to give in. In that manner, the 9 gets to avoid the unpleasantness of a conflict and vicariously enjoy the pleasure that the partner feels. 9s tend to merge with their partners and to empathetically take on the partner's feelings and desires. This naturally, this naturally makes it difficult for the 9 to cause hurt or frustration to those they love. On any individual occasion, this policy of appeasement might indeed be reasonable, but as a general policy, it does not bode well for either the 9 or the partner of the 9. The problems generated from this policy follow a few predictable patterns. The 9's partner might actually begin to resent the passivity of the 9. It can be difficult to respect someone who will not defend boundaries, who will not take a well-defined position. Other individuals gladly accept the willingness of the 9 to adopt their agenda and then become overtly dominating and in some cases even abusive. So a 9 is one of those marriage partners that often are abused. The 9 might even appear to accept such aggressions against them, although resentment invariably builds beneath the calm and placid surface. We've all experienced people that are in an abusive situation, and we say, why don't they leave? I would leave if I was in that situation. Well, a lot of it is explained by the 9 strategy of just keeping peace, and things will get better. Things will get better. Remember, a 9 is inherently optimistic about the future. They think, well, things will get better. Things will be okay if I just don't rock the boat. And if I rock the boat, it's my fault. Right? So they set themselves up for abuse. 9s have a difficult time accessing their anger, as anger is the emotion which in its pure form signals to us that one of our boundaries has been violated. As 9s tend to have a diffuse sense of their boundaries, they tend also to fall asleep to their anger. The anger exists, however, and will manifest itself perhaps in passive-aggressive foot-dragging or checking out from important engagements. Passive aggression is really the key to think about in 9s. They always are causing a problem, but never directly confronting anybody, never arguing. They aren't ready on time. They don't do what they say they were going to do when they said they were going to do it, those kind of things. For some 9s, unprocessed anger manifests itself through the development of psychosomatic illnesses. Other 9s experience instances in which pent-up anger expresses itself inappropriately and unexpectedly with such a fury that it shocks those on the receiving end. As predominantly a 1 I swing both ways. I go to a 2 And I go to a 9 on my wings. Thought that would wake people up. Sometimes I'm more 2-ish. Sometimes I'm more 9-ish. And one of the things I remember my mother-in-law saying about me is that he almost never gets mad. It takes so much to make him mad, talking about me. But when he gets mad, he gets mad. And that's the 9 in me that explodes inappropriately and unexpectedly when I have had enough of whatever it is, whatever has driven me to that point. And that's the 9-ish kind of way. And we all have that to some extent, some of us more than others. All of these manifestations of anger are naturally a good deal more harmful to the 9 and to the 9's relationships than expressing it in a way which is appropriate to the needs of the situation. The ability of a 9 to acknowledge anger and to recognize and deal with its causes is a pretty good measure of the 9's general level of health. The really crucial problem for type 9 individuals is that they tend to have an inadequate sense of self. This leads to a tendency on the part of the 9 to both downplay their own significance and to borrow a sense of significance from others. There is, in fact, a sort of paradox at the heart of the type 9 fixation. At a largely subconscious level, 9s intuitively grasp that the constructed personality, the personality with which most of us identify, is not the true self. It is not who they are. Okay, now remember, if you go back to our filtering, when we talked about the different filters, self-concept. Give me another one. Attribution. Attitudes. Knowledge. Okay? In this self-concept, this is what I interpret that they're talking about. We all have this self-concept. I don't know if any of you ever listened to Prairie Home Companion, Garrison Keillor on radio. Big liberal guy, but his thing yesterday, and I guess it was a kind of a best of type show, was about him seeing at age 13 a photograph of himself. His father got his camera down and took pictures of everybody in the family. And when they came back from the developers, this is the old days, came back and he opened he was the first one to get the mail. He opened the envelope and immediately destroyed all the pictures of himself. He said, how ugly, how terrible do I look? And he said, no one would ever like me. No one would ever marry me. No one would ever want to be my friend. Nobody, because of how ugly I am and how repulsive. And of course, the theme of this whole section that he was on was never look at a photograph of yourself. It'll ruin what you think of yourself. It'll ruin your life because you'll suddenly see yourself the way you really are rather than the way you think you are. And that's the self-concept filtering that we do, that we see ourselves, and I've talked about this much in the past, that self-concept is at the root of our arrogance, but it's at the root of what people call an inferiority complex. No one has an inferiority complex. They have a frustration that the reality of themselves does not meet their idealized self-concept. We all have this idealized self-concept of what I'm like, what I am, how smart I am, how attractive I am, how kind I am. All of the things that go into making up that self-concept, we have this idealized. And if we don't meet that in some way, then that disappointment will manifest itself in what people call an inferiority complex or in some other way. So what they're talking about here in this constructed personality, the constructed personality is that one that we live with as what we think. And then sometimes things just break in and shatter that, and we realize we're not our self-concept. We're not that. And that we do not need to be depressed, disappointed, upset, frustrated by the reality of who we are just because it doesn't meet my own idealized self-concept. So we need to understand that. And this is something that we all are like that, but the nines kind of get that. They realize that they're not what they really think that they are. And they kind of understand that. This is, in fact, a very deep truth. The constructed personality is simply that, a construct through which the consciousness operates, much of it built out of defenses and reactions to dangers which are no longer present. It is, in a sense, both a limitation and an obscuration. But the constructed personality also serves a necessary function. It gives the individual a base from which to operate, a sense of self, however ultimately flawed and partial. While the constructed self is not ultimately who we are, it is a necessary step towards the development of true individuality. Gurdjieff has this to say: for inner growth, for work on oneself, that means making yourself a better human being, a certain development of personality as well as a certain strength of essence are required. And insufficiently developed personality means that a man cannot begin to work on himself. He cannot begin to study himself. He cannot begin to struggle with his mechanical habits. Without a well-developed personality, without a firm sense of self and adequately defined boundaries, the nine is left in a state of permeability to forces both outside the ego and to those subterranean forces that reside beneath it. Understanding this essential porousness of the ego of the Enneatype 9 is absolutely essential to an understanding of all of the basic manifestations of the nine specific problems and challenges. So you want to put a big circle around that slide. It is the difficulty that type 9 individuals have in addressing this core issue, which is called in the traditional Enneagram the vice of indolence. At some point in time, the Enneagram writers took the 7 deadly sins and added 2 more, and so that they could have 9 to match the Enneagram. And indolence is one of those 9, and they have assigned it to the 9. As already indicated, indolence does not here refer to laziness in the traditional sense, although it can manifest in that manner in some individuals, but to the lack of attention to the most important matter at hand, the lack of attention to what constitutes true work, in other words, the development of a solid sense of self from which the 9 can be truly effective in the world. According to the teachings of the traditional Enneagram, the essential virtue of each type appears when the fixation or vice weakens, teeter-totter effect. The more your weakness, indolence here, is elevated, the weaker will be your virtue, which for the 9 is holy love, they call it, because of the peace harmony idea that the 9 wants. They say, well, that's God. Peace, harmony, love, all that stuff. So as the vice weakens, the good trait strengthens. And as the vice strengthens, the good trait weakens. Oscar Acazzo, the father of the modern Enneagram, indicated that the virtue of type 9 was what he called holy love. 9s, even at average levels of health, tend to be kind, compassionate, and tolerant individuals. Their personalities dimly sense and partially embody the nature of their type-specific virtue. True love does involve openness to others and permeability of ego boundaries. It does involve acceptance and forgiveness. It does involve a sense of interconnectedness of all things, just as 9s have known all along. Like all of the fixations, the type 9 fixation can be viewed as a sort of failed shortcut. It can be viewed as the personality's flawed attempt to achieve the true virtue. As type 9 individuals learn to love and honor their own integrity, they are able to extend that love to others in a truly effective and beneficial manner. Here is, of course, time for another of our caveats. This is human viewpoint thinking, okay? So as you learn to love and honor your own integrity, you're better able to extend that love to others in a truly effective and beneficial manner. Just means being a better human being. As they heal themselves, they heal their relationships with others and actively work towards healing the wounds of our ailing planet. Nines are sometimes called the peacemakers, but they are not really worthy of that name until they leave behind the idea that peace is synonymous with the absence of conflict. Making peace requires the nine to develop a truly active nature, the nature that nines are able to manifest when they shed the passivity associated with their fixation, when they lose the indolence, the laziness of working on their own problems, their own needs in developing themselves, then they can see that peace is something that is more actively promoted as opposed to avoiding conflict. Nines with a 1 wing tend to be more cerebral and imaginative than those with an 8 wing. They typically withdraw under stress more than those with an 8 wing. They sometimes find it difficult to ground themselves. They tend to lose focus and can get lost in worlds of their imagination. Nines with an 8 wing are overall more grounded and assertive. They tend also to be more sociable than those with a 1 wing, and nines with a 1 wing are more theoretical. Those with an 8 wing, more practical. Type exemplars. Presidents: Abraham Lincoln, Gerald Ford, Ronald Reagan, Dwight D. Eisenhower, and George W. Bush are all examples of Enneatype 9. George W. Bush is a perfect example of the principle of disintegration. 9 goes to 6 when under stress. Remember our healthy and unhealthy, the way they go from one place on the Enneagram to another. Well, 9 goes to 6 when under stress. What is 6? What is it that we know about the 6? Tell me about the 6. Something's going to go wrong. I got to be ready for it. Yeah. And so that's and if you think back at certain speeches in George W. Bush's presidency, you can see that things are going to be bad. We have to be ready for it. You know, we've got a plan for future terrorist attacks, and to be kind of fixated on those things. I mean, there's normal prudence, but there's also a fixation that can take place. But George W. Bush is not an overthinker who is fixated in the mental center, hence not a 6. His father was the 6. Famous actors, and you all have to help me with these because I haven't the slightest idea who hardly any of them are, except Sophia Loren, because I see her pictures in the men's room at restaurants all over, in Italian restaurants. Okay, Uma Thurman, Liv Tyler, Liv Tyler, is that it? Jennifer Aniston. Sophia, Jimmy Stewart, I know Jimmy Stewart, yeah. Ingrid Bergman, Kevin Costner, David Carradine, Keanu Reeves, and Ray Romano. Those are all 9. So you can see the kind of characters they play, and quite often their characters are 9s as well. 9s often have an intuitive grasp of the workings of the subconscious mind. Consider Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell in this regard. In an extended sense, we can even see Walt Disney, the fantasist, in this light. Musicians: Paula Abdul, Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton, Dave Matthews, Josh Rouse, Willie Nelson, and Janet Jackson. Authors: J.K. Rowling and Laura Ingalls Wilder. Cartoonist: Charles Schulz. Painters: Chagall and Matisse. Fictional examples include most of the hobbits in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, as well as the author of that book and its sequels, and the director of the films, Peter Jackson. It's if you've noticed throughout when we've done these type exemplars and we get into movies and so on, that quite often the director or producer has the same type as the author of the book and also the main character. They're attracted to them. They're attracted to directing those kind of movies. Also, J.K. Rowling's famous hero Harry Potter is a 9. Other fictional examples include Star Wars' Luke Skywalker, as well as George Lucas, the director of Star Wars. There's another example of a director matching up to the Enneatypes of the main characters or the author. Possible mistypes. 9s and 1s can be mistaken for each other if the wing is especially strong or the individual observed under a narrow set of circumstances. We always drift towards one side or the other depending upon circumstances. We have a general approach to life, but at times we're going to drift as a 9 towards a 1. At other times we're going to drift towards an 8. Sometimes we're going to go towards the 6. I was trying to think of the healthy one for the 9. 2? I can't remember that one. Anyway, we will drift in those areas based on the specifics of the circumstances we find ourselves in, or the way we're filtering. Our mood, our attitude, our knowledge base, our self-concept will cause us to shift a little bit in the way that we react in certain circumstances. And that's why it says if you observe the individual under a narrow set of circumstances, the 9 will look like a 1. If you look at them under a different certain set narrow circumstances, then they would look like something else, like an 8. 9s in particular can have an opinionated streak and strong moral convictions which they might express freely. In this way, they might appear somewhat 1-like. The 9's conflict avoidance is often enough not global, so that there are some 9s who will forcefully argue for their political positions while nevertheless deferring to their spouses on all matters of any significance. So sometimes that idea of avoiding conflict doesn't always hold. And I would say that it's when the person, it's something that the person has a strong belief of what is right and wrong. In the case of the 9 here, if I have a strong belief in what is right and wrong, I'm going to stand up for it as a 9. But in other things, I'm going to go for peace and harmony. And especially in an intimate relationship like marriage. Follow that? There are times that they're going to go for it and argue forcefully. Other times they'll just back down because it's not that important. But this potential similarity notwithstanding, 9s are far less likely to try to control others or their environment and are generally much more capable of seeing the elements of truth in opposing points of view. Something which is often a weak spot for 1s. 1s are black and white thinkers. 9s can see both sides. On a personal level, 9s often struggle with self-assertion, whereas 1s find it comes more or less naturally. 9s generally find ways to relax when feeling tense. 1s have generally tense personalities and experience real difficulties when it comes to relaxation. Who has time for that? 9s and 2s can easily mistype. It is especially the case that female 9s who are identified with a nurturing role might mistake themselves for 2s. Both types tend to be generous and oriented towards feelings and relationships. 9s, however, are truly humble and generally self-effacing, whereas 2s tend to have a high opinion of themselves and tend to want to receive recognition for their good deeds. 2s are also far more aggressive when pushed than are 9s, who characteristically withdraw under stress. Difference between a 9 and a 2? A 9 will do things and never tell you about them. A 2 will make sure you know that they did those good things. Okay. 9s and 3s can mistype if the 9 is especially successful or the 3 especially depressed. 9s can identify with a social role much like 3s can, and can be charismatic like many 3s. But the overall pattern of their lives ought to indicate the true type. Even very successful 9s tend to adopt an attitude of easygoing unpretentiousness. They tend to be more cooperative than the overtly competitive 3s. And even workaholic 9s seem to know how to relax, something which generally does not come easily to the more driven 3s. Finally, while 3s can lose their motivation when depressed, their essential goal-oriented nature is likely to assert itself fairly quickly. 9s and 4s can both be sensitive, creative, withdrawn, and introverted, and for these reasons can cross-type, although it is generally the 9 who mistypes as a 4, or who is mistyped as a 4 by others on the basis of these similarities. Nines in particular sometimes recognize that they are far less happy than they let on, and many nines feel inadequate when depressed. They therefore think they must be fours. The internal landscape of fours is much darker than that of nines, however, who tend to see the best in others and who characteristically detach from strong emotions, especially strong unpleasant emotions, which the four is attracted to. The four likes the strong emotions, likes the unpleasant emotions because it fits their self-concept of being unique. Nines are also not in search of an authentic self or the proper presentation of that self. They are generally somewhat oblivious to these concerns. Finally, nines tend to relate well to a greater variety of people than do fours, who often feel like misfits. Nines and fives are both withdrawn types, and many nines are systematic thinkers and intellectuals. Therefore, there are some commonalities which might generate a mistype. It is generally nines who mistake themselves, or are mistaken by others, as fives. Fives almost never mistype as nines. One of the principal differences lies in their approach to thought. Nines tend to look for thought systems which offer some sense of harmony. Fives are attracted to what disturbs them and often embrace or struggle against nihilism. Nihilism, a viewpoint that traditional values and beliefs are unfounded and that existence is senseless and useless, a doctrine that denies any objective ground of truth and especially of moral truths. Nines relate well to a wide variety of people, five only to a few. Nines and sixes can easily mistype or be mistyped, although nines more commonly mistype or are mistyped as sixes than the reverse. This is exacerbated by the fact that both sixes and nines tend to be blinded to the nature of their respective fixations. In addition, many sixes do not appear to be visibly anxious, and some nines do. Overall, however, nines lack the nervous mental energy of the six. Nines, moreover, tend to be trusting and optimistic about the future. They tend to see the best in others. This is almost never the case with sixes, who have a suspicious streak, generally believe that there is something possibly threatening just below the surface, and often have a very cautious view about the future outcome of present events. Nines and sevens are both optimistic, and sevens can appear to be easygoing and self-effacing, so the two might be confused. Although nines seldom mistype as sevens, and it's not common for sevens to mistype as nines, sevens tend to be self-centered, whereas nines tend to yield too much to the preference of others. Nines tend to go with the flow. Sevens tend to push their own agenda. Sevens tend towards hyperactivity. Nines tend to be laid back. A mistype between nines and eights might be generated if the wing is especially strong, but as a general rule, the two should be distinguishable in terms of the manner in which they assert themselves. Assertion comes naturally to eights, not so for nines. Nines tend to be conflict avoidant. Eights sometimes invite conflict in order to rev up their expectations or to clear the air, to find out what you've got. Nines tend to withdraw under stress. Eights tend to assert themselves. Well, that's about enough for the first hour. So we'll take a break and come back, and we're just about right on schedule for completing this on time and getting through all 120 slides, just as I thought we might. Let's close with a word of prayer, and then we'll take a 10-minute break and get back at 11 o'clock and see if we can get started again. Father, we're grateful for this hour. We're grateful for the fact that we can look at ourselves from human viewpoint, see our humanness, and then we'll be able to turn off humanness, turn on spirituality, so that we might function in the life that you have given us in our new birth, and not function in the old man that we are instructed to put off. We thank you that you have given us the insight, the spiritual insight to see ourselves, not just to learn about ourselves, but to actually see ourselves and be able to understand what's wrong with it, what appears to be right with it, and know the difference between it and our spiritual nature. We thank you in Jesus' name.